For everyone shall bear his own burden. And let him that is instructed in the word communicate to him that instructeth him in all good things. We are supposed to bear our own burden. Now, this is something that is repugnant in our day and age. When we look upon how the world is, there is such a criticism, disgust almost, for the very idea of actually working for one's own benefit, to actually take responsibility for one's own life. And that is the whole purpose of why we are alive. God gives us life, He gives us grace, He gives us certain powers and abilities, He gives us certain capacities, blessings, whatever you want to call them, so that we are able to stand on our own 2 feet with His help and serve Him through His labor. That is the goal that each and every one of us should have. But throughout history, we have tried very hard to get further and further away from God. And so first, the goal was to serve oneself first and then God. So humanism. And then it was to find the solution or the perfection of humanity in that service to oneself. So starting to leave God out of even that, and so forth and so on, until now we have a neo-agnosticism and neo-paganism, which effectively cuts God out of the loop altogether, has rejected nature, the very nature of labor and perfection, and instead has created a world that is entirely false and fictitious, creating in our own image and not representing God. One thing about nature is that it represents God, and we can see God in it no matter what. But in the artificial world, whether it be the culmination in artificial intelligence, whether it be the digital age, whether it be electronic music or whatever else, any number of other things, there is a striking departure from nature. It is something that is man-made almost entirely, not something that is based upon God and His nature, everything that he generated to reveal Himself to us. As such, man does not find any sort of satisfaction in the labor and the sweat of his brow. When God cast Adam and Eve out of the garden, His punishment to Adam is that he would have to work by the sweat of his brow. And everything that we would have to do would have to come at a cost. And of course, the modern world, again, that is abhorrent. We would prefer everything to be free. We try to do everything as painlessly as possible, comfortably as possible, as little labor as possible. It's an impressive feat in the modern world where we have so completely distanced ourselves from reality that we don't have to live by the rules that God has given to us. That we have tried to eliminate the punishment for original sin as much as possible. And this is one of the reasons why we see such a shocking lack of complete responsibility in every aspect of modern life. People do not take responsibility for their actions because they do not take responsibility for their lives, because their lives are not their own. Their lives are a fabrication. The only way that our lives can be our own is if God sets us free from ourselves and from the bonds that the world, the flesh, and the devil hold upon us. That is the only way that can become ours. And as such, we have to fight against those 3 enemies constantly. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that we are serving God through fulfilling our duty of state. That is why we are here, to know, love, and serve God. And how do we do that? In the very concrete circumstances in which we live. No other way. But we have to sit up and take responsibility in order for that to happen. The situation we find ourselves in, whatever it may be the occurrences we see around us, we must live up to that standard. We must take possession of what we are. We are already creatures that are thoroughly schizophrenic because we are body and soul. We belong to heaven, and yet we live here on earth. Our way to heaven is our life here on this earth. Our soul is the dominant part of our being, and yet It is at the service of the body, because the body is the one who feeds it and guides it and whatever else. It helps it to understand things. The soul is the one who's supposed to reign. It is supposed to rule, but it receives all of its information through the senses. And so therefore, it's a symbiotic relationship, but if we do not use it as such, if we do not use it as supposed to be, then what it does is it creates a schizophrenia or a schism within us. So we become creatures who begin to subdivide ourselves into little pieces, which is one of the reasons why there is so much confusion, depression, mental illness, and everything else that goes on in our modern world. One of the reasons why we are unable to take responsibility is because we do not know how to. We do not understand or appreciate what it means to stand on our own work and to accomplish something of our own by our own hands or with our own minds. It's harder and harder to do so, to take possession of something by actually accomplishing it, because we do not understand for what we do it. Why are we doing these things? Well, we have not answered that question yet, at least not as thoroughly as we should. So therefore, we don't take responsibility. Rather, we try to point fingers, we try to avoid responsibility, we try to do everything we possibly can to not actually stand on our own feet and put ourselves before God and offer what we are doing to Him. Whatever it is that we are doing, we need to give it to Him. As such, we need to focus. We need to understand and appreciate, what am I doing here? When I go to work, when I get up, when I see my family, whatever it is we are doing each day of the week, we must appreciate and understand that we have a responsibility before God to do this as our work for Him, or rather, to do this as His work through us. That is the responsibility we have. And each and every one of us has a distinct responsibility. Each member of the household has a distinct responsibility, but they all need to add up to the sum total of what it means to serve God for the entire cast of characters that is in the family, however many there may be. The weaknesses and struggles that we confront must also be clearly understood, that God allows us to suffer, and He allows us to be weak, and He allows us to be blind and foolish and whatever else. He allows those things so that we can take responsibility of our lives, so that we can serve Him with those things, so that we can overcome them and find Him, whatever that may be. Whatever our weaknesses, whatever our goals, whatever everything, we have to use it to serve God. That's what it comes down to. And again, the way for us to do that is to take responsibility. It is our life. These are our temptations. These are our weaknesses. This is our family. This is our chapel. This is our church, our country, our everything. And we have to actually stand up and take responsibility for it. One of the main problems with the modern world is everybody is a talker and nobody's a doer. All you have to do is go out and look at how much production is actually done for all the amount of chatter there is. It's truly obnoxious. Everybody's a critic. Nobody's a producer. Everybody talks and everybody criticizes and everybody has something to say about darn near everything, and very few people are actually doing the work themselves. When Socrates was on his journey of trying to find the wisest man in the world, he got to know people of all walks of life. And he tried to learn from each and every one of them. And he found out that when he went and talked to a carpenter, that the carpenter was able to teach him many things about carpentry and about how to actually work with wood. But then Once the carpenter would start opening his mouth about anything else, he'd find out that he was severely deficient in knowledge of other things. If he started to try to philosophize with him, he would find out that the carpenter didn't know much about philosophy. And the more the carpenter would try to talk as though he were a philosopher, the more that became painfully obvious. Carpenters can be philosophers too. It's just that there are two very separate things. And that is what is the danger of our world. We have mountains of information at our fingertips and not a single brain cell to be able to assimilate any of it. So unfortunately, everybody talks a lot because they have a lot to say without actually knowing a thing. And this is something that is very, very, very dangerous, because how can God speak to a mind that is that divided on itself? How can a mind that is so split apart and fragmented and confused with so much information, how can God speak to that mind? The answer is with great, great difficulty. Because among other things, they're not receptive. Because among other things, they actually think they're very wise and very smart, and therefore they're not listening. They're picking up so much other chatter all around that they don't have the idea of how to listen for God. And so what is the result of this? No one takes responsibility for a thing. Because nobody is a whole and entire person who is trying to make sense of their life. Rather, they are so completely focused on everything else but what their life is really about that they cannot actually be a comprehensive person. We need to avoid falling into this trap. As much as we would like to say, that's for them, we're not like that. Be careful. This illness of agnosticism and everything else has been started for hundreds of years now. Our society is soaked through with it. These poisons and these errors are an absolute part of every facet of our culture, and unfortunately, yes, even within our church. And so therefore, if we think that we are free from these errors and these problems, we're devastatingly wrong. We need to appreciate the fact that we are children of this world, and so therefore we are tainted by some of the errors in the same way. That does not mean that we're as bad as everybody we're talking about. However, that disease is still there. And by being aware of it, we can fight more perfectly against it. How do we do this? Well, we start with one thing. Let's start taking responsibility with one or two things. The most basic, the most fundamental. So those of you with families, those of you with homes, go home and take responsibility for them. The order, the structure, the schedule, lifestyle, all of those things. That is your job. That is your responsibility. God has given it to you so that you can give it back to Him in order. And so that's where you start. And the second place you start is right here in church. So to continue on the aspect of what I talked about last week with people being able to help and contribute in the church, this is a way that we can actually show that. We want to take responsibility. God has given you this Mass, this chapel, this community. And we need to stand up and take responsibility. Each and every member of it needs to stand up and take responsibility. It's easy for us to point fingers. Something isn't right, something isn't good. I don't like how the ushers do this. I don't like that this part of the building is falling apart. This building project is going too slowly, etc., etc., etc. Now, one, I find it interesting that I hear about the chatter secondhand. So if you have a problem, please come talk to me. That's what I'm here for. I try to make myself as available as possible to answer questions and doubts and problems. And trust me, I know it's not nearly enough, but I try. I can't give a lot more time, but I'll try. The second thing is part of taking responsibility means stopping the talking and doing the doing. So there were a lot more people here to clean the church yesterday, and I very much appreciate that. So thank you all very much. But this is something that is going to need a long-term commitment from people. People are going to have to keep coming. There's going to have to be more people involved in the cleaning. And there were, at the beginning, at the very least, there were only 2 men here for maintenance. Now, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. More people would be a lot better. So instead of complaining about the many issues we have in the chapel, maybe ask how you can help. And it may be just doing a trip to Home Depot and buying something, which you get paid back for, by the way. Or maybe it's just holding a ladder for somebody or a flashlight or whatever it is. Just find some way to help. Join one of our many groups, the Ladies League of Our Lady of Victory, the Men of the Holy Name Society, the servers, the choir. There's always room for more. There's always room for more. We need help in a lot of different ways around the chapel. However you can help. Your generosity is absolutely necessary in every possible aspect. And of course, when everybody hears that from a priest, their first thought is he's asking for money. That's actually not the case, though. I will never turn it down. But the question is much more simple than that. This is your church. God has given it to you. It is his, absolutely, but he has let you in. This is your responsibility to make sure it has everything it needs to be as perfect for God as possible. So we're never going to make it perfect, just like we're never going to make our own souls perfect. But we can sure as heck try, and we can give everything that we have to make it as close as possible. And we can give more to the church because God gave it to us, just as we can give more of our life because God gave it to us. Give more to our family and of our family and in our family because God gave it to us, and our home and our jobs and every part of our lives and being, because they all belong to God. They are his. We are his. And so as he has given everything to us, we give him everything back, but in the best possible order that we can do so. Be generous. God will never be outdone in generosity, but understand that is not why we give. God does that as an incentive because he understands that we're weak creatures. But he also wants to make sure that we are giving for the right reasons. So we don't give for the compensation. We don't give for the money or for the good job or whatever else. We give to God because it is his due. St. Teresa of Avila famously said, "If it were possible to love God in hell, I'd be happy even there." It's not possible, by the way, and that's St. Teresa. But that's the mentality we should have. We should strive to have. We're not going to get there anytime soon. She's up there. We're not. But that is the point. That is what we are supposed to shoot for. That kind of generosity of handing God a blank check and letting him fill in the amount, and not asking for a receipt, and not asking for something back or in return. It's not a transaction. It's a donation. God does not force us to follow him. He does not oblige us to be his. He does not oblige us to serve him. He invites us and he introduces us to his home so that we can learn how to do so. And he invites us to participate in his sacrifice so we can watch the master at work and join in. But he does not oblige. And we need to have the same responsive generosity when we give to God. And when we give to God, it is in every part of our lives. But let's start with those 2 first. Let's put our homes in order, and let's put our time in church in order. And let's start to work on those 2 things, and everything will continue to grow and flourish within our lives. The more powerfully that takes root in our souls, the more God can work with us to overcome the ills and ails of this world so that we will be able to more perfectly serve him in every part of our beings and our lives, and we will be able to be eternally happy with him in heaven. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen.